Yo, what's going on, man? It's your boy, Project B. But for the people who know me in the real world, my name is Brandon, and that actually might change pretty soon. People don't know, but I'm that type of dude that will go out and change his name. By the way, that's something I would do. But I just want to come in with another episode and go in on a topic that I think is not so commonly talked about and is a little bit on the side of not taboo, but it can definitely be considered a topic that's avoided because we live in a world now where women are put on a pedestal, and I don't have a problem with that. I don't have a problem giving great validation and love to women because, as Tupac said, we all came from a woman, right? But I do think that life is putting such a demand on women that it is causing them to act adversely in a search for survival. So, one thing that I really want to touch on is how when people think of narcissism, they mainly think of men. They often picture men. But women can display it too, and they display it. They can display it in a number of different ways. Um, You know how confidence and self centeredness, a lack of empathy, and a need for admiration can all be things that are like linked to narcissism. And most of those characteristics are really pointed at men. But really, what I want to be able to drive is how narcissism looks in women. And also come from a perspective of how narcissism can look within cultures that are black and brown, right? And communities that are black and brown. Because I do think that the overall prevailing country is narcissistic. I think that the United States and Western culture has a heavy I problem where everything is about you, the individual, and the actions and the ways that we take on different problems all are centered and based in our own individual survival opposed to the communal aspect and not seeing the group as an I. Uh, what it was it Kobe or was it Jordan who said there's no I in team, but there definitely is one in the win. So I look at that and I think that that's the way the world is right now. Is that the idea of being a team, whether it be in a relationship, a couple, or a community, has all kind of drifted towards narcissistic tendencies and people always looking to game and one up the system. So, what I really want to start at is like some of the core traits of female narcissism. A lot of it is like the validation that comes through how they appear, the looks, the charm, and the status that is where they can kind of hold themselves up and rank themselves up against each other. But how that looks against the man. Men, if they are to be narcissistic or look narcissistic, a lot of the times it just looks like grandiosity, right? You have men that are putting all of their bravado and all of their essence and everything that they think they are, they're putting it on Front Street and they're trying to lower other people's values in order to raise their own. So that's one way that you can see male narcissism take place. But with females, you have somewhat social manipulation, right? That manipulation can be using gossip, triangulation to be able to kind of pit two different people, whether it be two different men or women, because I'm not just saying that this is a situation where it's women being narcissistic to men. That's obviously a heterosexual romantic relationship that most people would be trying to figure out. But there are bisexual relationships, there are just friendships, familial relationships, where when the female is narcissistic, even amongst two women, there's still this give and take, or where one's overly taking and one is just overly giving or being the one who is being consumed as the source. But in this case, that's where, as a female, because she doesn't have the physical prowess or just the stature that a man would have, her manipulation tactics may look a little different, right? So that's one thing that I think that when we look at female narcissists and how that all comes about, that can be something that we have to pay attention to. You have the victimhood narrative. Positioning herself as a perpetual victim. There's always something that's happening in her life that has caused her to be the one that has, why she's gotten the short end of the stick. But this could lead to guilt tripping. This could lead to shame. And this can cause a lot of men to have issues and problems within their own relationships and within their own self-identity. I think that I dealt with that too, within my relationship. And this is, again, I say this not to like cast down on women or make it seem like women are not, look, we all carry our own toxicity. And I think that a real strong, valuable man would not be able to be manipulated by any type of narcissist, male or female, because they will have such a care about their own self-worth and self-value that at the first sign of any type of disrespect or any type of manipulation, they will either remove themselves from the situation or they will either address the situation. So I do think that that is something that should be looked at in terms of just understanding that men and women are always going to have negative aspects. And all I'm doing here is addressing them, because I think that we hear a lot about the negative aspects of men, but we don't get to really understand how the other side of the equation is involved within the matter. Right? You have entitlement that comes about. You have emotional exploitation. So that's one that I really, really want to talk about, because you can have when a person guilt trips, or you have a man who's maybe not completely whole and maybe not completely in his full masculinity, but when he does fall, or when he does either fall short as a provider, fall short as a protector, or even sexually, romantically, this emotional manipulation can cause a lack of confidence, can cause a person to become very, very, how can you say, with their emotions, they may not be able to be as confident. And once you get into this state where you're always seeking validation on the other side, you're trying to prove something to your partner, to have them accept you. Now you're playing this cat and mouse game where they can be up, they can be down, and they can leverage your emotional well-being. I believe that I was in that within my relationship, and I don't think that it was intentional, but I do think that that was a strategic way of approaching control from my ex-partner, my ex-spouse, is that was one way that she was able to reestablish control by causing me to get out of balance. I have attention deficit disorder. So with that, emotional regulation is really hard for me, right? Rejection, sensitivity, very hard for me. In my relationship in the beginning, she made comparisons to her ex-partner, right? To say, what they did sexually, and made certain characteristics and certain, how can I say, she highlighted certain things about his stats, I guess, because I don't know if you want to call it stats or call it his measurements. Let's just call it that. But you know what I'm saying? It's hard because that will live in the mind of a man, right? And obviously a secure man wouldn't, but I would say that there's a two-sided approach to that problem, because most men will carry that aspersion. So I do think that it's important to understand that a woman can cause this slippery slope to kind of, become a little more slippery. Where you see it, when you see it in friendships, you see competitive natures, undermining of women, sabotaging of other women, right? Trying to set people up. In families, you might see an overbearing maternal, like a martyr type mother, a neglective controlling partner. So with that, you have a partner that may, when you're having an emotional situation, she may be there and she may not. Almost like a Dr. Jekyll, a Dr. Jekyll and a Mr. Hyde type situation. You also may have a situation where, you might have self-sabotage. You might have a projection where she tries to, paint you out to be the bad guy and do different things like this. This can all cause a lot of deep damage, emotionally, psychologically. when you look at male narcissism on women, there's usually a physical component. There's usually a component where the man is trying to establish one physical dominance, but he also kind of emotionally or more so psychologically manipulates the woman and puts her in a position where she can't really afford to say anything because maybe he's the breadwinner, maybe he's the one causing or generating all of uh, the momentum of the household and the family, so the woman feels somewhat trapped. But a man, if he's dealing with it, he'll feel like he's walking on eggshells within his own household. He'll feel like every time he says something, he very rarely is doing something the right way. If he is exhausting himself, this is not, I'm talking personally. I mean, but maybe some other men can relate to this, is that he may be exhausting himself physically in the material world, in the working world, commercial activity, trying to progress himself. And he's maybe not present as a partner. However, him being shamed or him being put in a situation where that makes him feel less than the man, or he's getting yelled at. I don't think that men like being yelled at. I think that women should probably ask men how they feel about that. But it does feel very like you're talking to your mother. Like, yeah, that's what when boys get yelled at, they're thinking about their mothers yelling at them. And boys really try for a long time to get away from that, because in reality, when your mother is yelling at you, you feel emasculated. I do see that there's a lot of emasculation going on in the dating market today. There's there's fireworks going on. It is a Mexican Independence Day, so blah blah blah. We're doing it big, man. But can y'all see, boy? I'm half naked out here, boy. Let me cover up. But you know what? That's just something to think about. Let's think about how partners can be affected when we look at this. There could be a lot of confusion from the partner, lower self-esteem, and walking on eggshells. As I said, when you're doing that, when you're walking on these eggshells, you're always kind of trying to fill out your partner. You don't know what the day is like when you come in. When the partner comes in, when you come in from a day of work, or you're wondering if this partner has looked through your stuff. Maybe if you do have something to hide, maybe you will be a little upset, a little concerned. But if that's the narrative, there's something that you find that you're just uncomfortable in the space that you're in, or you're constantly having arguments, then there may be a situation where maybe you guys just aren't a fit, or there's some sort of manipulation going on. I should have knew that from the beginning. I mean, my ex, within like the first month or two of us being together, was like going through my phone, and I should have looked at that as the ultimate sign of disrespect, and should have known that she was a habitual line stepper. She would constantly provoke. I'll never forget when we first had my daughter. I was very tired. I was young, 25, 26. My daughter was 6 months. I'm sleepy and I'm working, and it's just extremely exhausted. Staying at my mother's house at the time, and she wanted me to help with the baby. I get it, but I was very tired. But she goes in the kitchen, pours some water, and douses it in my face. And I'm like, yo, and this causes us to have like a tussle, because I'm like, yo, hold on, what do you think you're doing? Because like that's my response to that, because I looked at that as an ultimate sign of disrespect. And in reality, she did assault me, but no one, again, society doesn't look at it like that. Society doesn't look, because she's the weaker person. But in reality, I was sleeping, and unprovoked, because she didn't like what was going on, she decided to douse water in my face. I grabbed her and said, what do you think you're doing? So that could easily be flipped on his head to say, oh, well, why would you grab her? But why did she initiate? Why did she decide to, one, disrespect me and throw water in my face with no respect? So from that moment, I should have known that there was just no respect in this relationship. We hadn't even been together a whole year at that point, if maybe a year, maybe at that time. So that's what I'm talking about. I was young. She was like 5 years older than me. There was already these signs of manipulative behavior, of her putting this type of energy and effect on me. And this is before we even get deep into the relationship. I was talking about divorcing her 2 years in, right? It was something where I was like, yeah, this isn't working. And as soon as I would mention a divorce, she would burst out in emotional outburst. Why would you do that? You always say that. Stop saying that. And it made me feel guilty. This was the guilt trip. But in my mind, I had already come to the conclusion that this does not work. I've already made the mistake of deciding to marry you at this time. I married her knowing her within 3 months, 3 to 4 months. So it was, something where I was like, wow, I made a mistake. But, and I was willing to admit that and then hopefully move on as friends because we already had a daughter. So, that's what that was. But let's look at how that can affect the children, right? Enmeshment, right? The children can become very attached, but unhealthily attached to the mother. And then have the role reversal where the children are parenting the parent or being overly concerned and feeling like they have to check in on the parent and have to be there for them emotionally and make sure that they don't make them upset because of, so they decide to not really be their true selves and live in their true identity because they know that it may make their parent not feel so good. You know what I'm saying? In this case, their mother. And then what we have is, or neglect. Simply neglect of emotions. I think that neglect is not always like, oh, you're not there at the house, but emotional neglect, where you see a child is really having some emotional burden and that their well-being isn't straight and that the mother is at the center of that. If you see a woman who's overly emphasizes on the image and perception, this woman is likely someone who at least has a lot of narcissistic characteristics, or she has NPD, where she can't go to the gym possibly without makeup, right? And every picture needs to be the perfect picture, and every time she's in a social setting, it's like she cannot be outdone by any of the other women, where she cares that much. I know that there's part of the woman aesthetic and the woman nature that, they're social beings. So there is some natural way that can, in healthy way. But if there is an overemphasis, that's when we're talking about there's an unhealthy level of reliance or unhealthy level of caring on how you present publicly. When you have those sudden mood swings and when they're not the center of attention. Right? If they're not the person being addressed, if they're not the person who's always being called on, always having the answers, then they start to develop a sense of discomfort. They start to, have to find a way to maybe even be combative or to they overly express so that they can become the center of attention. So maybe it starts off with just being the know-it-all, maybe kind of syndrome. And then maybe that's not working. So they become like the contrarian, the person who just has to give another point of view because they need to be able to have their opinion, their voice be heard. If they have a lot of patterns of relationships that just fall apart, and this goes for men and women, if you kind of see that every person that this person comes in contact with, there is like a phase where they're like really good together and they have all this like love and connection with each other, and all of a sudden the relationship falls apart. That's a person you can tell that they might be the common factor in these relationships and how they fall apart. That's just narcissism 101. They use people, and then when that use is up, that person's usually tossed in the trash. I was caught in between what I believe to be two narcissists. I'm not a therapist. I cannot diagnose anyone, but I can identify behavior. And for sure, I was able to notice that I was around my boss, who was, he has pretty much narcissistic characteristics, grandiosity. He was, he was like into rumors, into like kind of lowering people's self-worth. And, but he also liked to present like he was this like nice humanitarian, loving guy. And then also talk about those same people behind their back. So that was classic narcissism. I didn't really know what it was fully until after the fact, and I found out what narcissism was. And then I kind of replayed back what was going on with me and with others. And like this dude, every person who was at his top spot as a employee, in this place as a coach, every person who was there, they all left on bad terms. Right, even people who were not necessarily in a bad spot, if they left, like there was never been a person who like healthily left the situation of working with this dude, right? Because the environment was very toxic. So I was in that toxic environment, and I was also at home in a toxic environment. So that during that time, bro, I lost hair. Like it was very hard for me. Like I looked way older than I look right now. I probably looked about 40. I maybe looked about 40 years old during that time, and I'm 35. I'm 34 right now, but yeah, I mean, I was in my 20s looking like I was 40. So it was a thing, bro. It was the emotional burden, and on me, like I held it together for a long time until the very end. In order to like deal with someone like that, right? You have to acknowledge that they're not going to really take acknowledgement of their faults, or they're going to be accountable for what they really do. They can always kind of bypass their faults. They'll apologize, but it'll be one of those is like apologizing because I got caught type of deals, not because they truly sincerely feel like they did something wrong. Um, and I think that's really the real sign of a true narcissist versus someone who maybe just makes mistakes. Someone who makes mistakes really will sit with themselves for a minute and possibly go to you and honestly tell you, hey, you know what, I was wrong for something, this or this or that. But someone who has either drifted too far, and that's why I say drifted too far, because I don't think that being a narcissist really is something that like you're born with. I don't think anyone's born being a narcissist. I honestly think that really what happens is that, the conditions of life start to get really stressful, and your way of approaching survival is that you like start to use really really aggressive tactics, really really manipulative dark triad type of tactics, which are psychopathy, and then you have Machiavellianism, where you start to just game everything. Everything is a game, and you're trying to win. You're trying to stay on top of the game, even though you're causing a little bit of pain, because the pain that others feel doesn't really equate to the pain that you felt probably in your life. And you're like, hey, I was done this way, so why not do it to others? And I get it. Hurt people hurt people. That's like the saying, right? So I do understand it. It's just that it doesn't make it okay. Just because I understand it doesn't mean that it's the thing that people should do. It is something that I think that's the real reason why we're having such issues in our society and culture right now is that we allow for this to go on. We allow for this type of behavior to exist and to really thoroughly kind of spread throughout people. One thing I really think that we should do is like limit emotional engagement and like don't feed into the manipulation. When that person is kind of leading you down the path of trying to tell you or trying to guide your perception or things like that, take a step back, get away from them. Don't allow them to either rile you up or take you down, because really it's not the taking down. The taking down part usually comes after the raising up. So that's the way most times most narcissists get away with what they get away with. They don't start by lowering you because you will reject that right away. Sometimes the person have to introduce you to pleasure first before they introduce you to pain. Or if you're just a really weak person, they're just going to bully you. They'll bully you right away, and then from that bullying, they might raise your like you might try to vie for their approval for a while, which I did that at work. I wanted their approval so bad because they had already subjugated me and put me in that low position, in a low self-esteem position. So I was trying to really work my way up through to be in a high self-esteem position through acceptance and approval. And then once I got that, I was really just on the chopping block for being able to be lowered again. Because now I'm holding on to that esteem that this person has given me instead of having self-esteem. It was an outside esteem that I now had. So I would say just limit the exposure, have firm boundaries. So when you know that you don't want to do something or you've communicated something to this other party, then I would say that it's very important that you allow them, that you definitely make it known to them that this is a line that they can't cross. That takes courage. This society, there are people who are, I don't think that many people have courage, because even narcissists don't have courage. They just have manipulation. But courage is to be able to be honest. If you can be honest with your environment and tell the truth with yourself and with others, then you're in a great place, right? But if you're in a place where you're always having to manipulate, always having to lie, always having to scheme, trying to lower people's self-esteem, talk about, like in the case with women to men, maybe talk about their manhood. You see women use tactics like talk about a man's sexual performance, or she might talk behind his back to her girlfriends. That energy does exist. Maybe he never finds out, but sometimes, mostly they do. And maybe she may even be cheating on the man or having her own, but then projecting on him as if he's doing that, right? So that he has this in this flux always. You get what I'm saying? So that's always another thing too. And then validate yourself instead of seeking validation from them. That's something I already addressed in terms of just you understanding that if you constantly allow them to set your value, then you're going to be on this yo-yo. You're going to be on this up and down cycle of waiting for the cut, and that's going to just lead to a lot of anxiety, and that's where the walking on eggshells coming from, because this is your evaluator. You're always waiting for them to tell you if you're doing good or bad, instead of you just being well with that within yourself. And I think that that's where I looked at my last relationship, is that I was looking for another mother. I was looking for another woman to help, give me the confidence to see if I was worthy enough to be a man, and looking for her validation, instead of just really coming to the understanding that, I'm a man, that like becoming a man without another person there, right? Because that's what men become men without women, right? You get what I'm saying? So a man must first become a man without a woman there in order so that he know who he is. But if he goes into that situation as a boy, then he's going to be doing on-the-job training. He's going to have doubts. He's going to have a lack of confidence when it comes to really hard challenges that woman might present to him. And it's not that she might present it. Because what it is she just brings a different energy and a different dynamic. So it's not that she's challenging him intentionally, unless she is fully in her full feminine, right? Because children challenge. So we look at like children. So when I say that in a relationship, a woman who's coming in not completely matured as a woman in her full feminine aspect, how could she really display that if she hasn't reached that level of maturity? You can't be what you're not, right? What you have never become. You can't say, "Oh, I'm not able to be in my feminine because you're not in your masculine." It's like if you have reached that level of femininity, you will never lose it. You will never lose it. You will never regress back. It's because you have reached that level. It's like if you reach the NBA, you're not going to start playing like you did in high school. There's certain skills and attributes and ways of being or ways of going about the game of life, in this case the game of basketball, but the game of life, that you just won't step back into because you are that, right? So I think that that's something that and as men, same thing. And I think we need to really reach a level of understanding what it's like to reach a level of masculinity that is healthy, that is structured, that is ordered, that is built on leadership, that is built on protection and projection of a future that's healthy for not only the people for themselves, but for the people that will be attached to them, right? So I think that that's an important thing, that before we get into these relationships, that's what we end up needing. We need to go and really need to focus on. Seek support from networks and therapy. That's always a thing. I would not recommend group therapy with somebody that you feel is a potential narcissist, because what they can do is they can manipulate the therapist. They can manipulate the therapist. They know all the words. They know all the things that have to go along with therapy. And they will use that in a therapy setting against you. And if you are somewhat of an empath and you're somebody who can't really express themselves fully or stand up to the onslaught of different things, then that will be something that may potentially bury you if you're in that type of scenario. But that's one thing to really just focus on, that narcissism is not exclusive to one gender. I would say it's about 50-50, especially because we're trying to come into a world where things are more equal. We're trying to do this so that, you look at women having to take on the demands of a masculine-driven world. So it would make sense that they would do their best to navigate those waters as best as they could. Again, it doesn't look well for a woman to be grandiose, right? That still socially carries a bad stigma. But to be coercive and to be able to manipulate psychologically, and to be able to manipulate through her feminine essence, because it's a receptive drawing in type of essence. But it's almost like a Venus flytrap in a way. It's like you get drawn in, but then you get swallowed whole. And again, not paying that imagery, I'm sure, will make a lot of people upset and triggered. But the best way that I can explain that is it is a lure. You know, men really get caught in that situation. And then men on the back end, because they have the physicality, because they can have the tendency for aggression and so much virility, that when they realize that they're in this trap, they act out and they become frustrated and their anger roars. So the world sees that and they don't see the other half. So it's almost like when you look at any type of sport and you see like two players, they get into an altercation. I'll just go with basketball. And like two players get attacked or one player gets attacked. But the person who initiated was the first person. That person rarely gets caught because it's the response to that everyone sees. And I think that that's what we see a lot in society, is that we see females, in this case, this is what I'm addressing in this whole video, is that there are female narcissists who are provoking and trying to trigger men. Some are actually want them to do something physical because there's an advantage to that. There's a later trail that they can go down to be able to leverage against that man. But what they can do is they can ruin that man's life, and that is a power. Instead of killing, like men, they might get to an aggression to the point to where they might kill each other, hurt each other, beat each other up. In the worst case scenario, someone dies, right? But with women and men, a woman will rarely kill a man, but what she can do is she can kill his character. She can socially kill him. And she can put him in a place where the world rejects him because they have an image and an identity built around who they think he is based upon what she's saying. Because we are in a world where we believe women. And what that means is that they can throw rocks and hide their hand. And that's not okay. We just need to ask. And that doesn't mean that we don't believe them. It just means that we investigate thoroughly and we look at the trail behind it, and we look at the whole picture, and we listen to both sides equally. Because usually there's another person, it was like who threw the first punch, and it doesn't have to be a physical punch. It can be an emotional. It can be a punch of like people hitting below the belt on a real sentimental level. You know, talking about people who are very like the people care about, and saying things that are really hurtful. You know, they say words don't hurt people, but I mean, people have committed suicide off of words. So it's something that I think that we should really look at, really pay attention to. My whole point of this video is to address how we can address narcissism in general in a culture that kind of lives and thrives off of it. But in general, really looking at the other side, the unspoken side of narcissism, which is female narcissism, especially in my finishing closing in Black and brown communities, because we've come up in very fight or flight survival type of modalities. And with that being said, mostly what we end up doing is going to aggressive ways of surviving. You know, men become physical, women become cunning, and they're able to manipulate. And in the world right now, they've gotten all the tools and all the leverage to do so. So it doesn't surprise me that that's what's going on. All right, it's Project B, and now you can follow, subscribe. Definitely try to tap in with me. I'll talk more about some of the things that I've dealt with, and then I'll try to talk to other people to help understand what they've been going through in their relationships and life. And please share this if you can, if you may know someone who may be going through something and this might resonate with them. All right, peace.